YouTube, Twitch, games, content, and time. That's what the last 6 months or so have been for me. The thing about all of this is that it is my first rodeo with content creation, or playing games on the internet. As far back as April of 2016, while I was still living with my parents and Overwatch was just a twinkle in the eye of Blizzard Entertainment, I started messing around with this content creation thing. Look at baby me. He has no idea the life that's about to hit him like a truck for the next few years. What a whirlwind it's been. The last 8 years have been a learning experience of what I want to do, what I'm able to do, and how to make those two things coexist while also maintaining everything else in my life. I've once again decided to jump headfirst into the deep end of content, and just because I didn't start this whole thing at the beginning of the year doesn't mean that the games that came out before I started the loop reviews don't deserve them. I'm not crazy enough to go back and review every game I've ever played. We'd have to start with the Sega Genesis and work our way up from the 1990s. But at least the games from this year that I spent the most time with should get their time in the sun as well. The plan is simple for this video. I want to put out some thoughts and explain what I did with the rest of my year that wasn't on camera. I don't plan on saying too much overall, as the video could easily be 7 different videos, but relevance has 2 doors, and I'm a lot closer to the new shiny door than I am the rose-tinted nostalgic one. Will this be a waste of time, or will I have something entertaining to say? Let's get on the train and take a trip down memory lane in the Unreviewed Games of 2023's loop. To kick this whole thing off, and starting pretty much chronologically, I spent a lot of times in Valheim's Mistlands update at the beginning of this year. My co-op partner, V, and I started a fresh run of the game after not playing it for almost a year at least. Playing through the update felt nostalgic in a lot of ways and honestly painful in others. After spending so much time in this game with our group of friends when it came out, and to now just have the 2 of us running around after our group had some life changes and once again time became the enemy. We spent a lot of time running around through the old world, or the base game, working our way through the biomes to see bosses and zones that were still new to me, as I hadn't made it that far with the group before, all the way up to the Mistlands, where we were greeted with the biggest change in gameplay we had found for the entire game. Don't get me wrong here, the game is still a masterclass in survival crafting, but Mistlands in many ways doesn't feel like an expansion, it feels like a sequel. New mechanics that don't even seem like they are in the same engine, some enemies that feel out of this world, terrain that feels alien. Overall, this didn't feel like the Valheim that I knew before, but it worked for me. The whole game felt so much more expansive, but there was a disconnect for me between playing in the mists and playing outside of them. Everything felt like a bit of a cakewalk in comparison. It seemed like different games, and I really can't stress that point enough. If there was anything I can point to that I didn't like or had issues with, it wasn't really with the Mistlands itself, but it was with the old world. Because it felt like different games, it almost felt like the difference between World of Warcraft Classic and Retail. The bones were all still there in both of them. The logic made sense, but one felt more epic than the other. Not that base Valheim feels bad at all, but it's such a massive jump going into the mist comparatively. I know that Iron Gate is working on the Ashlands now, and I'm very excited to see what happens there. If the next jump for Valheim is as big as Mistlands was, it's going to be fantastic. But I hope for a look at the base game, and enhancements for it overall to even out the curve of the expansions is on their agenda, as well to just take Valheim even further. If you couldn't tell by now, I play a lot of survival crafters. And just this year alone, I think I dabbled in almost 11 titles in the genre. Much of my time spent in these games almost feels like another job for me. It gives me something to keep my brain running and moving. It makes me think in a different way than my regular job does, and it makes me make bigger, more ridiculous monstrosities that irritate everyone I play with. Until they start laughing about it. Making giant tube towers, a cluster of conveyors, roads to ruin across the map are all parts of Satisfactory that really show the chaos of its gameplay, as well as its genius. You can take the time to build the most pure, clean, productive factory on the planet, or you can make a disaster that gets the job done. I am absolutely the second person in that scenario, much to the chagrin of my co-op partners. Satisfactory is one of the games that truly is a vehicle for fun and not a whole lot else, that makes you think and react and do math that normally wouldn't be part of a game, and that's part of the charm. There are many silly parts to this game. There are frustrations, and there are giant spider monsters that need to be eradicated at all costs. Some of the things I don't like about this game are really just minor details. There are issues with syncing for multiplayer at times. There are graphical issues with equipment, and sometimes the servers just chug. But for how big this world is, and all the things happening at once, it's hard to fault Coffee Stain Studios on any of those when the game is just the truest form of a sandbox crafter that exists. If you can think of a way to do something, it'll probably work. It may not be the prettiest, and it may cause rage for anyone that has to even look at it, but it can be done, and that's so much more fun to plague your friends with. The last survival crafter, at least on this list, is one that I really wasn't sure I was going to like going into it. V Rising. The blood-sucking, asymmetric survival game of monsters and men from Stunlock Studios had a massive update this year with Secrets of Gloomrot, the first major expansion for the game. Unlike others on this list, not only did the game add a lot of new features for the new zone, one that adds a lot of new areas to explore and fight through, but also did a lot of work on the experience before you get to that new zone. Once again, I'm not shaming Valheim here, but Gloomrot felt more cohesive to its base game than Mistlands did for Valheim, adding many new bosses, reworking some old ones, and shuffling around when you fight them and at what levels made the game feel more like the updated product that it was supposed to be. Adding in monsters that veer away from the only vampires and hunters aesthetic of the game allowed for many new opportunities and experiences for your vampiric character overall. Now, with this glowing review, there are some issues here still. The building system is vastly better than it was, but there are some odd limitations to the whole process that make it frustrating at times. Many of the mechanics of boss fights feel poorly tuned, and there are obvious best answers to many fights while also having so many different abilities that are meant for players' specific playstyle. There are still big gaps on the map that have been there since launch without an update. The majority of the eastern parts of the map, for example, and that just feels like a misstep to me as a player when all the new content reworked the base game and didn't include the obvious hinted at zone from when the game was in early access. Now, that's the last of the survival crafters on this list, and I'm very excited to see what comes in the future for all three of these games and the genre as a whole. The game that probably got the wildest response from both fans and detractors was Hogwarts Legacy this year. Set in the universe of Harry Potter, but well prior to the books or movies, Hogwarts Legacy took players on an adventure in the world that felt magical and like all of the good parts of the books, but couldn't get away from the issues of the problematic author that wrote them. With a new story, and many of the same races and spells that people had been enchanted by in the late 90s and early 2000s, many hoped that it would be an opportunity to separate the artist from the art. Many others noted that no matter how much you suck, you can't get all the poison out. The game, as a game, was good, with hack and slash like gameplay, a sizable open world, and many spells and dark arts still being shown, giving the player the ability to be as morally upstanding or dastardly as they wanted to. The game as a wizarding world adaptation was true to the actual source material, not retcons from Twitter, which was a blessing and a curse in many ways. I thought overall it was a bit shorter than I was expecting. I felt that some of the boss fights weren't all they were cracked up to be based on the gravity of the situation. Some of the houses got the short end of the stick for quests, while others had better overall dorms and private areas. Going to Azkaban as a Hufflepuff was an awesome side quest, but I wasn't a huge fan of their common room. I would have liked to see some additions to the game overall, like Quidditch for instance, which Quidditch World Cup is still one of the best sports games ever made. I'll die on this hill. There were a lot of issues with graphics, audio and sounds, and overall performance at launch that were really a bit of a letdown, but overall the game was good. On PC. I have no idea how it even managed to port to Switch, and I'm afraid to even look into videos about it to see, especially after Mortal Kombat 1's recent launch. The game I was most excited for at the beginning of this year was Final Fantasy XVI, and its surprise drop DLC at the Game Awards this year is one of the reasons I'm making this video. I was not streaming, recording, writing, or doing anything when the game came out. I had thought about starting to stream again specifically for Final Fantasy XVI, but once again, time got in my way and I ended up buying my PS5 and playing the game in my living room and not for all the internet to see. I truly loved just about every part of this game. Clive's story, the massive iconic fights, the characters you meet along the way, and the friends you lose in the process all culminate in a game that any other year would have been Game of the Year. A fantastic story that grips you very early and doesn't let you go until well after the credits have rolled. Of course, there's also Jill. She's perfect. That's all. Even with a fantastic game, there are drawbacks. The PS5 exclusivity was a major pain point for me and many other players. I knew I would be purchasing a PS5 at some point, but I figured it would be for a known first-party exclusive, not for a Final Fantasy game, which is a franchise that has been multi-platform for many years up until now. I at least expected a simultaneous PC launch, but even though it was talked about early on, that went away with a deal between Sony and Square Enix for timed exclusivity. Parts of the story had lulls, and a lot of it had some very obvious inspiration from a certain HBO television series and its source book series. Character archetypes, plot lines, and story beats, the amount of nudity, and depictions of war all felt like they would feel at home in Westeros just as much as Valisthea. Much of the side content had no real reason to power through it. The New Game Plus mode was a great addition, but like with reading a book, I can't just plow right back into it. I have to let it marinate, forget about it for a while, and then come back. Even coming back to the DLC after a short 6 months was hard for me. Remembering where I was, what I was doing, what the controls were all a struggle for me when I first returned. But quickly I jumped back in and pulled off some great fights. and died plenty as well. The number of side quests also felt a little beyond where it needed to be. Granted, the stories that were being told were interesting, but many of them felt like fetch quests for the sake of time padding, more than they were engaging. Still, this would have been my game of the year if another little RPG didn't absolutely blow me away just a couple short months after this game's launch. Alright, so there's one game on this list that very technically I didn't complete. That game, I'm sorry to say, is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I know. Now, before you get yourselves all twisted up, I played through the entire story and I'm currently about to walk into the last battle with the Demon King Ganondorf himself. I explored the depths of Hyrule. I explored the skies as well. I did so many shrines and puzzles. I know where Zelda is and I have the Master Sword. Do I need to explain more? To be fair, I was moving the week after the game came out, so I was a bit stuck, and once again, my time was lost in the fold. Tears of the Kingdom is easily the pinnacle of gameplay on Nintendo's Switch console. From the continuation of the Breath of the Wild story to the addition of the Sky Islands and the complete and total concealment of the depths from media and players, Nintendo was at their best with this game. The game itself built on many of the foundations of Breath of the Wild, traveling to the four corners of Hyrule, teaming up with the races and their champion to bring about the fall of Ganon, figuring out the puzzles of their temples and fighting the bosses. It was all the tropes of a Zelda game, and in many ways that was a detractor for me. Look, don't get me wrong, the game was fantastic, everything was good, but it felt like it relied a little too heavily on Breath of the Wild as a foundation. You could tell that the world aged and changed, but that was it. Just a bit too close to the Uncanny Valley line for me to be a perfect game. If I wanted to play Breath of the Wild again, I would have. There were some twists in the formula that made it overall a better experience and real depth, no pun intended, to the game beyond what Breath of the Wild had to offer, which is astounding in its own right. But how close to the source material can you get before it's additive instead of original? That's the line that Nintendo tiptoed, and really that's the line that they need to be very careful of with whatever comes next in this franchise. The last game on this list is one that I actually did stream all the way through on YouTube, and I even did it while I was writing reviews. So what gives? For each of my reviews on this channel, I write a script, and at the very top of that script, I have a section for myself titled, Why I Think I'm Qualified to Talk About This Subject. For each script, I have to give myself at least 3 good reasons why I feel my content and opinion on this subject is relevant, and not just me chasing content for content's sake. For Super Mario Bros. Wonder, in particular, I felt I wasn't overly qualified to talk about it. I've never been a huge fan of side-scroller platform games. Ironic since I grew up in a time when all games were side-scroller platformers. I was never all that entertained by them. I wasn't very good at them, and the infinitely repeating patterns and worlds didn't hold my interest. When Super Mario Bros. Wonder came out, I figured I would give it a shot and see if I was still just as bad as I remembered. For the record, I was better than I thought, but not by much. I was able to play all the way through the game. I enjoyed the challenge and variety of missions. I enjoyed the small story that was there, and I was very excited I got to play the whole game as Luigi, the superior Mario brother. Because of my lack of enthusiasm and lack of skill in side-scrollers, I didn't feel I was qualified to talk about the game in a full loop review. Talking about it here, though, in a slightly different context, feels different to me. There were lots of great things in the game. The power-ups, the one-off mechanics like riding flying bulls, or the background and foreground parts of levels. Many of the boss fights were very Nintendo style, but that isn't a bad thing. Not all games are meant for the hardcore players. Some are just meant to be fun and cute, and that's fine. Mario games, for the most part, are like this. Pokemon is another franchise in this boat. The overly critical eye isn't the one they're necessarily marketing to. It's kids who just want to have fun, and if they want to feel that they can achieve something like beating a game or working hard on it, then that's the reward for them, not the speedrun strats and difficulty settings. If that's your jam, then you can do that. But if this game taught me anything after my 25 plus years of gaming, it's that you can have fun in different ways, and even the frustration can be fun. I don't have much to compare this game to, as my collection of side-scroll content is very limited, but I am excited to see what the next side-scroller or platformer game I get into is. And it's going to have a lot to stand up to compared to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, and all the fun it gave me when I thought I couldn't have fun in this genre. Time is a marvelous thing, but it can also be a burden. As I explained in this review, my timing has always been a bit off, but now that I have a bit extra, I want to use it for this format for as long as I can. I enjoy games and experiences. I enjoy writing about them, talking about them, and sharing those experiences with people live on the internet. I've been a gamer for the vast majority of my life, and I hope to continue to play and talk and experience for a long time to come. I want to thank anyone that has come along for the ride throughout the years, and apologize to those that feel that they may have wasted some of that precious time in the past with my content and my lack of motivation or my life getting in the way. I hope you're as excited about the new year as I am, and most of all, I hope you're ready to catch the train along with me.